We are back with another deep dive today. And look, we're looking at a stack of intelligence that, quite frankly, it makes your standard morning business brief look like a nursery rhyme.
It really does.
Yeah, we are working our way through Manal Mehta's latest market intelligence report today, and there was a lot to unpack.
There is. And for those of you who track this specific source, Mehta doesn't just do, standard news. This is what you call a multi-INT strategy.
Right.
It's combining financial forensics, political intelligence, and some really deep science. The goal isn't just to tell you what happened yesterday. It's to triangulate what is about to happen by finding the discrepancies in the mainstream narrative.
Triangulation. That is definitely the key word for today. We are looking for that gap between the flashy headline and the actual boring balance sheet.
Yes.
And the gaps in this particular report are, they're wide enough to drive a truck through.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about things like ghost GDP. We've got a potential legislated kill switch for an entire sector of the beverage industry, and a really forensic look at why the supposed safe parts of your portfolio might actually be the most dangerous right now.
Yeah, it's a mix of these huge macro warnings and then very specific, almost microscopic market mechanics. We have the Citrini jitters that are just rattling the tech sector right now.
Yeah.
We have a fascinating contrarian play on legacy infrastructure, and we even get into some frontier science that kind of challenges how we fundamentally treat neurodegeneration.
Well, let's start with that macro picture, because this term, the Citrini jitters, it's circulating in all the institutional notes right now. It feels like the entire market is just holding its breath.
Completely.
And this all revolves around a research report from Citrini Research that just completely upends the whole AI uplift narrative we've been fed. The headline number, the one that everyone is just freaking out about, is this forecast for a 10% unemployment rate by 2028.
Right, and that is the headline that grabs you. 10% unemployment, that is a depression-level statistic in our modern economy.
It's massive.
But we need to look at the actual methodology behind that claim, because it's not just baseless doom-mongering. The core thesis is that the efficiency gains from AI, they're going to be realized much, much faster than new job creation can compensate for.
Okay, but I have to push back on that immediately, because we've heard that the whole robots are coming for our jobs narrative for a decade now.
Sure.
But right now, today, we have a demographic cliff.
Sure.
The workforce in the West is actively shrinking. We have massive labor shortages in healthcare and the trades, manufacturing. So how does Citrini square a 10% unemployment projection with a literal lack of human beings to fill existing roles?
And that is a very valid counterargument. And to be fair, it's one the report itself acknowledges. However, the vital distinction here is where that unemployment hits.
Okay.
We aren't talking about suddenly having a surplus of plumbers or nurses. This forecast is specifically targeting the white-collar cognitive labor force.
The laptop class.
Exactly, the laptop class. The argument is that software can displace these mid-level administrative and creative tasks at a scale and a speed that demographics just can't cushion. And you can see the market starting to price this in. Look at the recent sell-off in software stocks or the anxiety building up in private capital.
So it's a bifurcation, really. You could theoretically have a severe labor shortage in the physical world and a full-blown depression in the digital world at the exact same time.
That's precisely it. And the jitters come from the fact that the broader market is currently priced for this massive productivity boom, right? Not a displacement crisis.
But look at the leadership. You had Jamie Dimon on TV recently, and he basically brushed this whole thing off.
Yeah.
He publicly called the AI fears overblown. Look, if the CEO of JP Morgan isn't sweating, why should the market sweat?
Well, this is where the forensic analysis really comes into play. You have to look past the carefully managed CNBC interview. The source material notes that while Dimon is projecting absolute calm publicly, his private commentary and, more importantly, the strategic moves happening inside JPM, they tell a very different story.
Really?
Yeah. He is quietly conceding that fintech competitors, specifically the ones leveraging aggressive AI automation, are gaining serious ground in unit economics.
Wow.
He knows the disruption is real, so his public overblown comment is likely much more about managing market panic than stating his actual internal belief.
That makes sense. It's standard operating procedure. You stabilize the street and you hedge the back office. But let's look at the actual data the report provides. If AI is supposed to be this massive productivity engine replacing us all, the adoption numbers should be through the roof. But the micro-level data in the Meta stack tells a totally different story, especially regarding Microsoft.
This was easily the most striking data point for me in the whole stack. Microsoft is the bellwether for this entire movement. They have the distribution, they have the exclusive partnership with OpenAI, but the report highlights just a brutal statistic. Microsoft's paid subscriber share for Copilot dropped from 18.8% to 11.5%
Right.
in just 6 months.
From almost 19% down to 11.5 in 6 months. That is a massive churn rate for an enterprise product. I mean, we aren't talking about people canceling their Netflix subscriptions here. These are locked-in enterprise seats. Why are CIOs turning it off?
It comes down to friction. The initial promise was, click a button, get perfect code, or an email or a presentation. The reality, which is detailed in the retail due diligence part of the report, is that the hallucination rate, the error rate, is still high enough that it requires constant human supervision.
Right.
If you have to spend 20 minutes fact-checking an AI's 5-minute draft, you haven't actually saved any time. You've just fundamentally changed the nature of the work you're doing.
So the ROI just isn't there yet for these companies.
Not for the average seat holder, no. And this leads directly to the second, much more dangerous data point. 45% of Microsoft's remaining performance obligations are tied to OpenAI.
And the report explicitly describes OpenAI as an unprofitable customer.
Correct. So think about the mechanics of that. Microsoft is effectively booking future revenue from an entity that it is simultaneously funding. It's a closed loop. It's a circular economy. If the end user adoption of Copilot collapses, which that drop to 11.5% strongly suggests it might be doing, then the real revenue flowing back from OpenAI to Microsoft for compute credits starts to look incredibly shaky.
Which brings us to the core concept of this section, which I love, ghost GDP.
Ghost GDP. It is the valuation gap. It's the sheer difference between the trillions of dollars in market cap assigned to these tech giants based on the assumption of exponential AI revenue and the cold reality of the actual balance sheet risks. The ghost is the revenue that the stock market has already priced in, but that doesn't actually exist yet in the real world. If that revenue fails to materialize because the tech is just harder to implement than we all thought, that ghost GDP evaporates. And when ghost GDP evaporates, stock prices correct violently.
Hence the major trade implication mentioned in the report, which is short legacy tech. But we need to be specific here. What exactly defines legacy tech in this context?
Yeah.
Because Microsoft is technically a legacy company, but they are leading the charge.
Good distinction. The report defines the short targets as companies with high labor costs and an unclear or mostly defensive AI strategy. These are the companies that are just trying to bolt an AI chatbot onto a very human-heavy business model rather than rebuilding their systems from the ground up.
And it points the finger squarely at IBM.
It does. It highlights IBM's recent drop, which was their worst single-day performance since the year 2000, as a massive signal that the broader market is starting to sniff out this vulnerability. The core thesis there is that IBM has way too much headcount and just not enough proprietary automation to survive the kind of margin compression that Citrini is predicting.
Hold on, though. I want to put a pin in IBM.
Okay.
Because later in this exact same stack, there's a completely contradictory view on IBM and an actual bull case that I think is equally compelling. It feels like IBM is the main battleground stock where these two different narratives are colliding. But for this specific macro and ghost GDP section, the verdict is definitely short. The labor-heavy dinosaurs.
That is the consensus of the bearish signal in the report, yes.
All right, let's pivot to the section on corporate warfare.
Yeah.
Because we have a merger battle playing out right now that feels, it feels less like a traditional business deal and more like a high-stakes political campaign. Paramount versus Netflix for the soul of Warner Bros. Discovery, WBD.
This whole situation is a masterclass in how M&A has drastically shifted in our current regulatory environment. The raw numbers are pretty simple on the surface. Paramount has offered $31 a share for WBD. They are aggressively trying to usurp a deal that WBD already signed with Netflix.
Now, usually in a standard bidding war, the highest price just wins. But the structure of this Paramount offer is, well, it's exotic. They threw in a $7 billion regulatory termination fee and something called a ticking fee. Can you explain the ticking fee? Because that's not standard M&A boilerplate.
No, it's highly aggressive. A ticking fee means Paramount formally agrees to pay more per share for every single quarter the deal is delayed by government regulators. They are essentially writing a massive insurance policy for the WBD shareholders, basically saying, look, we know this is going to get held up in Washington, and we are willing to pay you for the wait.
But why would they need to do that? Is the antitrust risk really that high?
The antitrust risk is incredibly high for everyone right now. But the triangulated reality here, the thing the mainstream isn't focusing on, is that Paramount isn't betting on their financial numbers. They are betting on the political wins. You have to look at the board composition of these
Right.
companies.
We have Susan Rice sitting on the Netflix board.
Exactly. Former national security advisor, a very heavy Democratic operator, and President Trump has publicly targeted Netflix specifically because of her presence there. He has actively politicized the company. Now look across the aisle at Paramount. The CEO is David Ellison,
The son of Larry Ellison.
the founder of Oracle, a major Trump donor, and a very close ally. David Ellison was actually a guest of Senator Lindsey Graham at the State of the Union. The political signaling there couldn't be any louder.
Okay, so the underlying thesis of the report is that the DOJ is essentially a weapon. If WBG goes with Netflix, the DOJ, especially under a potential Trump administration or just facing a hostile GOP legislature, they will grind that deal to dust. But if you go with Paramount, you have political air cover.
Exactly. The real alpha for an investor here isn't in analyzing the synergistic overlaps of their streaming platforms. It's in analyzing the political capital of their leadership. The report suggests going long on Paramount because they are practically the only ones with the unwritten regulatory passport to actually close a deal of this magnitude in this highly charged political climate.
It's deeply cynical, but honestly, it checks out. Regulatory arbitrage is becoming a very real strategy. Speaking of politics just completely destroying business models, let's talk about the kill switch for hemp. This is a story that I really feel isn't getting nearly enough headline space, considering the deadline is coming up fast in November.
It's a massive existential story for the beverage industry. We are talking about the loophole market, the entire ecosystem of hemp-derived THC drinks.
Let's clarify what that loophole actually is first. The 2018 Farm Bill legalized hemp, provided it had less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC by dry weight.
Right. And dry weight is the absolute key phrase there, because if you bake a heavy brownie or you brew a 12-ounce soda, the total weight of the product is high. So you can legally have a very potent amount of THC, plenty enough to get you high, while still mathematically staying under that 0.3% concentration limit. It inadvertently creates this multi-billion-dollar gray market of completely legal psychoactive drinks that are being sold in regular liquor stores and gas stations.
And now, the empire is striking back.
The empire being a very unusual coalition of big alcohol and surprisingly legal marijuana.
That's the strange bedfellows aspect the intelligence stack highlights. You would naturally think the legal weed guys would support the hemp guys. A rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Not when that tide threatens their profit margins. The legal marijuana companies, the MSOs, multi-state operators, they have to pay massive 280E federal taxes. They have to deal with intense state-by-state tracking, insane security protocols, and severe banking restrictions. Meanwhile, the hemp beverage guys are just selling across state lines with minimal oversight and no dispensaries. The legal weed lobby wants this hemp loophole closed just as badly as the alcohol lobby does.
So what is the actual mechanism? How are they managing to kill it?
It's quietly hidden in a federal spending bill provision, and it's being championed by Senator Mitch McConnell. It effectively redefines the legality to permanently close that dry weight loophole, and the timeline is just brutal. The provision explicitly states all sales must cease by November 12th.
November 12th, that is a hard stop.
It is a terminal date-stamped catalyst. The report doesn't mince words. If you are invested in public companies that rely on this specific revenue stream or the distribution networks built around it, it calls this a death sentence.
But is there any chance of a reprieve? I mean, usually these sorts of regulatory cliff edges get delayed or watered down in committee at the last minute.
The source material says betting on a legislative lifeline is a very low probability bet. The coalition against hemp is just too strong. You have the moral crusaders, you have the alcohol lobby fiercely protecting their turf, and you have the massive cannabis lobby protecting their regulatory moat. Who is really left to defend the hemp loophole? Just a highly fragmented group of small business owners. The smart money right now is actively shorting any exposure to that market.
Brutal. Really brutal. All right, let's move over to the forensic watch list section. This is where the report looks at specific corporate scandals and hidden accounting irregularities. And we have to talk about the aerospace supply chain, because this is wild.
The AOG Technics scandal. This is one of those stories that just keeps getting worse the deeper you dig into it.
So the main headline you see in the news is that a DJ, a guy named Jose Alejandro Zamora Urala, was sentenced to prison for selling 60,000 counterfeit aircraft parts. But focusing on the DJ really feels like focusing on the symptom and completely ignoring the disease.
Precisely. The DJ is just the guy who happened to find the unlocked door. The real story is the door itself. How on earth do 60,000 fake parts used in CFM56 engines, which, by the way, powered the older Boeing 737s and Airbus A320s, how do they get blindly accepted into the supply chains of Delta, United, and Southwest?
American Airlines alone took a $30 million hit just trying to clean this mess up in ground planes.
The systemic failure here is that the global aerospace supply chain is shockingly still analog. It runs almost entirely on paper, specifically these things called EASA Form 1 or FAA 8130 Re-3 tags. These are literal physical pieces of paper, or at best, basic PDFs that certify a part's entire history and safety record.
And a PDF can be easily edited.
Exactly. This DJ didn't manufacture fake high-stress turbine blades in his garage. He just bought scrap parts, or completely unverified cheap parts, and he photoshopped the certificates to make them look like they came from a certified repair station. Then he sold them to brokers. The brokers checked the paper, saw it looked legitimate, and passed it right on to the airlines. There was absolutely no digital immutable ledger. It was an entirely trust-based system, and he just exploded that trust.
It is genuinely terrifying that the jet engine keeping me in the air is certified by a system that can be defeated by a guy with an Adobe Acrobat. But wait, this brings us back to IBM. We literally just talked about shorting them in the macro section because of ghost GDP. Why are we bringing them up as a buy here?
Because every massive industry crisis creates an immediate demand for a solution. The entire aviation industry is now in an absolute panic about traceability. They urgently need a way to verify parts that does not rely on a piece of paper. And IBM happens to operate one of the very few enterprise-scale blockchain platforms that is specifically designed for complex supply chain traceability.
Ah, so this is the bull case for IBM.
This is the alpha hiding in the disaster. The source suggests buying IBM as a very specific play on this catalyst. They are the enterprise plumber who can actually come in and digitize this fragmented supply chain. It's a high-margin, incredibly sticky software solution that an entire sector is suddenly desperate for.
So as an investor, you have to weigh the ghost GDP of their bloated legacy workforce against the real GDP of their blockchain and enterprise solutions.
That is the exact paradox, and it's why forensic investing is so difficult. You can't just slap a label on it and say IBM is bad. You have to ask the harder question: which specific part of IBM's business is going to drive the stock price next month?
Let's touch on Mehta next. The report calls their situation a ticking time bomb, which is incredibly strong language for what is essentially an accounting issue.
It stems from a very specific Moody's alert regarding their data centers. Meta is obviously building massive infrastructure for AI right now, but they have this $28 billion residual value guarantee for their Hyperion facility.
Can you translate that for us? What exactly is a residual value guarantee?
It's a formal promise to a lender or a lessor that the underlying asset, in this case the data center, will be worth a very specific agreed-upon amount at the end of the lease term. If it ends up being worth less than that amount, Meta is legally obligated to pay the difference out of pocket.
But why wouldn't a massive data center be valuable? Everyone in the world needs compute power right now.
Because the underlying chip architecture is changing every 18 months. A state-of-the-art data center built specifically for today's NVIDIA H100 chips might be completely obsolete in 5 years. The liquid cooling requirements, the physical racking geometry, the power distribution networks, it all changes drastically. The risk highlighted here is that this $28 billion is sitting entirely off balance sheet. It's a hidden liability. If the broader market suddenly decides that these specific data centers are actually rapidly depreciating assets rather than appreciating real estate, the $28 billion suddenly looks like toxic debt.
And that inevitably leads to multiple compression. The stock price gets cheaper because the overall company is suddenly viewed as much riskier.
Correct. It's just another flavor of ghost GDP. These are assets that look rock solid on paper today, but might just be ghosts in reality a few years down the line.
Okay, rounding out this forensic list, we have Binance. The report details $1.7 billion in crypto flowing directly to Iranian entities linked to the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
This completely destroys the prevailing narrative that the crypto industry can self-police. The most damning part of the investigation found that these illicit flows were actually detected internally by Binance's own compliance software, and the investigators who flagged the transactions were simply fired.
Wow. So that is the smoking gun. It's not just institutional negligence, it's active complicity.
And that invites what the report calls draconian regulation. Look, if you are facilitating terror finance at that scale, the U.S. Treasury doesn't just issue a fine, they actively dismantle your organization. It is a massive existential overhang for the entire centralized crypto exchange ecosystem.
Okay, let's cleanse the palate a bit and dive into the contrarian's playbook section. We've looked at all these hidden risks. Where is the hidden value?
The overriding theme in this section is second-order thinking. The report urges you not to look at the direct, obvious effect of an event, but to look at the subsequent reaction.
Let's start with the housing market. It's essentially frozen. Mortgage rates are high. The lock-in effect is very real because nobody wants to give up their 3% rate. Nobody is moving.
So the consensus view says, sell anything related to housing. And we see companies like Whirlpool currently taking an absolute beating. Their stock is down roughly 14%. Why? Because historically, you buy a brand new refrigerator when you buy a brand new house. No new house sales means no new fridge sales.
So where's the contrarian trade there?
The trade is in what the report calls the limp-along economy. If you are forced to stay in your current house, things are still going to break. But you don't do a massive full kitchen remodel, that's CapEx, capital expenditure. Instead, you do a repair. You do OpEx, operational expenditure, you fix the leaky pipe, you patch the roof shingles, you paint the spare room to freshen it up.
Which points directly to Home Depot.
Exactly. Home Depot, ticker HD, is the prime beneficiary of this frozen market. They capture all that deferred maintenance and repair spend. The suggested trade is to go long on Home Depot while the big appliance manufacturers like Whirlpool continue to suffer. It's a very specific, targeted bet on the increasing age of the American housing stock.
I really like that. It's highly practical. What about the shipping industry, specifically oil tankers?
The focus here is on Frontline, ticker FRO. The consensus Wall Street view right now is sell. Shipping rates are sky high, so historically, in a deeply cyclical industry like shipping, that means we must be at the peak of the cycle. You always sell the peak.
But Mehta's report disagrees.
Strongly. The report argues that this is not a traditional cycle peak at all. It's a fundamental structural shift in global logistics. Look at the ongoing crisis in the Red Sea. Look at the broader geopolitical fragmentation happening globally. Ships are taking much longer routes now, not because of a spike in consumer demand, but strictly because of physical safety concerns.
Right, they had to completely bypass the Suez Canal and go all the way around the Cape of Good Hope. That adds weeks to a single journey.
And weeks added onto a journey means that specific ship is occupied and unavailable for much longer. It effectively constricts the total global supply of available ships. The source argues that this geopolitical friction is the new normal. These high shipping rates are durable because the world itself has become more dangerous. So the contrarian play is to stay long on tankers because this logistical inefficiency is permanent.
So war and instability are the bull case for logistics inefficiencies.
It's a grim reality to invest on, but yes, from a purely financial perspective, that is the play.
And finally, in this section, we have to revisit that IBM paradox. We have the short case, the ghost GDP, and the bloated labor force, and we have the long case, the blockchain, and the supply chain rescue. The source explicitly frames this as an ongoing debate.
It does, and it's really a debate about which specific phase of the AI revolution we are currently entering. If we are shifting away from model training, the glamorous work of building the next GPT-4 and moving into enterprise inference, which means actually securely using those models inside a heavily regulated bank, the technical requirements change entirely.
How so?
Look, a brilliant startup in Silicon Valley can build an amazing language model, but can that same startup integrate that model into a 50-year-old banking mainframe that legally requires 99.9999% uptime and intense regulatory compliance?
Probably not. That sounds like a nightmare. That's gnarly work.
And that's the exact word the report uses, gnarly. IBM fundamentally thrives on gnarly. The bull case is that IBM is the veteran plumber you are forced to call when the experimental AI toilet backs up and floods the boardroom. They are built to handle the boring, messy, highly regulated enterprise integration that the sexy startups won't touch.
So it comes down to your personal macro view. If you believe AI deployment will be messy, bureaucratic, and difficult, you buy IBM. If you believe AI will be seamless and will just quickly replace human workers, you short IBM.
That is the exact trait setup. You just have to pick your narrative and back it.
Let's zoom out to the geopolitics and flash triage section. We mentioned the new normal with the shipping tankers, but there's some very specific global flashpoints highlighted here. Let's start with Mexico and the whole nearshoring trend.
This intelligence is a huge blow to the popular de-risk from China thesis. For the last few years, everyone in manufacturing said, just build the factories in Mexico. It's right next door, labor is cheap, problem solved. But then El Mencho, the notoriously powerful leader of the Jalisco cartel, was killed.
And absolute chaos ensued.
Right. Major companies like Honda actually had to fully suspend their operations in the region. The extreme violence that erupted in Jalisco proved a very stark point. The Mexican state does not currently hold a monopoly on violence. If you cannot guarantee that your factory can physically open tomorrow morning because of a cartel war in the streets, you simply cannot build your critical supply chain there.
So the geopolitical risk premium on operating in Mexico just skyrocketed overnight.
It challenges the fundamental viability of the entire nearshoring model that so much capital has flowed into.
What about the Arctic? The report mentioned something called Arctic Specialist 26.
It sounds like the title of a Tom Clancy novel, but it's actually a very real, massive NATO exercise. And the reason for it is that Western intelligence has confirmed deepening Sino-Russian cooperation in the Arctic region. They are currently running joint naval patrols up there.
What exactly are they looking for? It's just ice.
Resources and transit routes. As the polar ice melts, entirely new, much faster global shipping lanes are opening up. And massive, previously unexploited natural resources become accessible for extraction. The militarization of the Arctic is presented here as a major long-term investment theme. It's literally the next frontier for global defense spending.
And just quickly, the report touches on Russia and Telegram. Russia officially opening a criminal case against the founder, Pavel Durov.
This is entirely about information sovereignty. The Russian government desperately wants to force domestic users onto Max, which is a completely state-controlled messaging app. They are trying to kill Telegram not because Durov is actually a criminal, but simply because the platform is encrypted and outside their control. It's a very stark reminder that in this era of the splinternet, tech platforms are actively being used as proxies for state power.
All right, let's end with frontier science. This is usually my favorite section of the meta stack because it offers a real glimpse of the future. And today we're talking about ALS and Alzheimer's, but with a really fascinating twist.
The twist here is a concept called metabolic psychiatry. Let's start with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. The highlighted study focuses intensely on something called the mevalonate pathway.
Which is what exactly, for those of us who aren't neurobiologists?
Think of the mevalonate pathway as a sort of master traffic controller for cellular growth and cholesterol management in the body. In a disease like ALS, the axons, which are the long wires that connect your neurons together, they wither and die. The groundbreaking part of this study is that it found that using statins, which are incredibly common, cheap, everyday cholesterol drugs, can actively modulate this pathway in a very specific way that actually encourages axon regeneration.
That is huge. So we aren't talking about waiting 10 years for some customized $2 million experimental gene therapy. We are talking about immediately repurposing a generic drug that's already at the corner pharmacy.
It's the ultimate form of medical efficiency. It's a drug repurposing strategy. The cure, or at least a highly effective treatment, might literally be sitting on the pharmacy shelf right now.
What is the connection to Alzheimer's?
This part is even more fascinating. It fundamentally links our sleep patterns to our core metabolism. We already know that poor sleep is heavily linked to Alzheimer's progression. The brain relies on deep sleep to literally flush out toxic proteins via the lymphatic system.
Like running a dishwasher for the brain at night.
Right. But this new research suggests that the root cause of that cleaning system failing is actually metabolic. The body inadvertently enters a starvation-like state, a severe metabolic crisis that forces the brain to shut down the cleaning cycle to conserve energy.
So the body falsely thinks it's dying of hunger, so it just stops cleaning the brain to save calories.
Essentially, yes. It prioritizes immediate short-term survival over long-term maintenance. The massive implication here is that you could potentially treat Alzheimer's by treating the patient's peripheral metabolism, by fixing the body's overall energy balance, rather than trying to attack the brain plaque directly with highly invasive drugs. It completely reframes how we view the entire disease.
That is that triangulation concept again, connecting the liver and the gut directly to the brain.
Everything in the system is connected.
Finally, we have to discuss this massive tech ethics standoff. The Pentagon versus Anthropic.
The Pentagon desperately wants to use Claude, which is Anthropic's flagship AI model for battlefield logistics and analysis. Anthropic has flat out said no. Their foundational company constitution strictly forbids the use of their technology for mass surveillance or any sort of autonomous weaponry.
But can a private tech company really hold out against the sheer weight and budget of the U.S. military-industrial complex?
That is the ultimate test right now. The Pentagon is actively threatening to just cut them out of all future contracts. It's a fundamental clash of corporate ethics versus national security imperatives. And historically speaking, the Pentagon usually writes a big enough check to change a company's values. We are all waiting to see if Anthropic actually holds the line.
We have covered a truly massive amount of ground today. I mean, from the ghost GDP of the AI bubble to the fake paper trails of aircraft engines, all the way to the metabolic pathways of the human brain. If you had to distill this entire stack into one overarching lesson for the listener today, what is it?
You have to look for the disconnect. The mainstream market says AI is booming, but the actual user retention data says it's stalling. The market says Mexico is the perfect new China, but the ground security situation says it's an active war zone. The market says IBM is a dying dinosaur, but the global supply chain crisis is screaming for their specific tech. The truth, the real alpha, is always found in the friction between the public narrative and the hard data.
And speaking of friction, I want to leave everyone listening with one final, very provocative thought. The China stealth dollar theory from the very back pages of the report.
Oh, the shadow liquidity thesis.
Yes. Everyone on financial TV says China is dumping U.S. treasuries and fleeing the dollar. But this source calculates that China is actively accumulating $100 billion a month in shadow liquidity via their state-owned banks.
They aren't actually leaving the global dollar system at all. They were just hiding deeply within it.
$100 billion a month. That is an astronomical amount of dry powder. What exactly are they saving all that up for?
That is the exact question that keeps me up at night.
On that cheery note, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep looking for the ghosts in the numbers and keep triangulating.
Stay curious.